Hello everybody, this is Vic Hermanson, or as they say, Vic Hermanson. I think I need to give you a warning about this podcast. It started off as a simple idea, but then it expanded far beyond what I ever thought it might do. It's going to be well over an hour long by the time I finish it. There's nothing problematic about it in terms of anything racist or sexist or homophobic or any of those things. It's just complex ideas, and it's based around an essay written by a brilliant man who can be very, very hard to follow, as brilliant men often are. I'm talking about demons. I'm not talking about the demons that you see in The Exorcist. I'm talking about what he postulates as demons that exist within all of us. Every single person, in his view, has some degree of non-mystical demonic possession. I know there are people who will find that idea offensive. And I also know that there are people who will find the 50-minute long essay that I read to be boring, or perhaps to be angering. So anyway, if you listen, please understand that you're in for an interesting ride. I don't think it's a bad ride, but I think it's something you should know before you get into the prior investment trap. Thanks, and welcome back to Trailer Trash Terrors.
Greetings, temporal humans. This is Boudreaux, the cybernetic ghost from the future. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 7, of the Trailer Trash Terrors podcast. This week's episode is titled Tragedy, Cowardice, Smoke, and the Pufferbelly Demon. I'll let the serious part of the show finish before I say sarcastic, demeaning things about Vic Hermanson. But for now, please accompany me to January 27, 1967.
Apollo astronauts Roger Chaffee, Edward White, and Gus Grissom lose their lives in a tragic flash fire aboard their grounded space capsule. The tragedy occurred during a simulated countdown for the first flight of the Apollo program, whose goal is to put a man on the moon by 1970. Grissom and White were veterans of spaceflight, Chaffee a rookie. During a drill similar to this, the entire three-man crew was engulfed by flames. A blue-ribbon panel of space experts is investigating, aided by impounded NASA films and tape recordings. Grissom was one of the 7 original astronauts. White was America's first spacewalker. Chaffee, never in space, had long experience as a jet test pilot. He was proud and happy that his first flight was to initiate the Apollo program. When the tragedy struck, one of the astronauts shouted, "Fire in the spacecraft!" In a few seconds, all 3 were victims of the swift inferno which left the capsule a blackened shell. One reporter said it looked like the inside of a furnace. Investigators theorize that perhaps a short circuit or electrical overload may have sparked the blaze. 27 would-be rescuers were all overcome by smoke and heat. Apollo astronauts Chaffee, White, and Grissom, martyred heroes who gave their lives in total dedication to duty. Their memory will forever be honored.
Trailer Trash Terrors. At about 6:30 p.m., January 27th, 1967, I was probably still playing with my friends in Louisville, Kentucky, on the small suburban street on which we lived. It was hovering around 32 degrees, and I'm sure my mother wanted me to come in and get some dinner. In Florida, right about that time, 3 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, lost their lives when the test capsule for Apollo 1 caught fire. They were inside that capsule, which had a 100% low-pressure oxygen atmosphere. They had chosen the 100% oxygen atmosphere to try to save weight on the capsule. They could operate at a lower pressure, allowing thinner walls. Well, what happened, apparently, was an electrical spark. So imagine you're three of the most accomplished men in the country. Your test pilots, your scientists, your engineers. You're sitting there in that capsule. You see the spark. You see the flames start to spread. You realize the design of the door takes several minutes to open. And imagine the terror of being there, understanding fully that you were going to die, and that there was absolutely nothing you could do to prevent it, and that no one could possibly come to your rescue. My family had a little black and white Admiral television. It might have been 15 inches across. I don't really know how big it was. What I do remember is that every couple of months my father would pull some of the tubes out of it, go down to one of the local convenience stores, test the tubes, and replace them. It would work better for a few days. They might have tried to watch the news that night while I slept, but I doubt that they knew until the next day. The next day, of course, every newspaper in the country was telling the story of the Apollo 1 fire. The Pittsburgh Press reported, "One astronaut shouted fire before blaze killed all three." The Arizona Republic, 3 spacemen die in fiery rocket. The Cincinnati Post reported, "Fire in the spacecraft, last word from astronauts." The Honolulu Star Bulletin wrote, "Astronauts' last words, fire in the spacecraft." Almost every paper in the entire nation was reporting on the fire, on the truly tragic death of Grissom, Chaffee, and White. Gus Grissom was a member of the original Mercury astronaut crew. He was the second American in space. Upon splashing down, there was an anomaly. Something happened and his capsule flooded. It sank to the bottom of the ocean. For years, Grissom was blamed for this. When the capsule was finally recovered, it was found that Grissom did nothing wrong at all. Throughout this entire time, his fellow astronauts generally thought of him as being the best of them. Ed White was the first American to walk in space. During that spacewalk, he lost a glove, and he maneuvered rather expertly outside the capsule using a small handheld oxygen thruster. He told people later that even though it was physically demanding, it was the most fun he had ever had, and he really did not want to come back into the capsule. Roger Chaffee was the rookie of the bunch. He was the epitome of the all-American boy, an Eagle Scout, joined the Navy directly out of college, worked on his master's degree while he was in college, applied to become an astronaut in 1963, was accepted, became a test pilot, became a specialist with NASA spacecraft communications, and was generally considered one of the brightest and most capable young astronauts at NASA. That's why he was chosen for this particular mission. This was a rehearsal. He would have gone into space. But instead, he sacrificed his life for what I consider to be a totally unnecessary reason. It wasn't Apollo. I'm happy that Apollo happened. I believe Apollo deserved everything it got. But the engineering and management decisions made with that capsule were genuinely wrong, and the 3 astronauts should not have died that day. In the song American Pie by Don McLean, which is about the death of Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper and Richie Valens, there's a great line where he says, "I saw Satan laughing with delight." It's very hard for me to not think of Satan laughing with delight as he, or it, watched the death of 3 of America's brightest young men, people who were brilliant, people who were dedicated, and people who had essentially infinite potential in their lives. They died because of one institutional disease which often seems incurable. That disease, my friends, is arrogance. I met an astounding and extremely interesting man in Houston. He had been a test engineer on several of the NASA Apollo programs and was intimately aware of the North American design for the Apollo capsule. He was also aware of its limitations. His name was Alan, and I will leave the last name out to assure the protection of his privacy. To this day, Alan was probably the smartest person I've ever met. He had the most active and agile mind of any human I've ever run into. There was nothing you could bring up that Al would not be able to discuss with some rather high degree of intelligence. History, math, music, literature, science, anything, you name it. Not only was he brilliant, he had had a very eventful, interesting life. He had a near-death experience on one of the NASA launch platforms when he was stung directly into a vein by a wasp and had an anaphylactic reaction. He met a man named A.T. Anderson, who lived south of Miami and had bought a massive tract of land there, convinced that he would find ancient aliens, that he knew where the ships were buried, that he had psychic understanding of what was in that land. And he did find some extremely interesting things. I've never met a more interesting person than Al. As humans do, we drifted apart. But before that happened, he wrote a book called Demons in the Mirror. I've lost my copy. I look for it every week. I look on eBay, I look in bookstores, I look on Scribd. Anywhere I can look, I go to the internet and find obscure book groups and ask, does anybody have a copy of Demons in the Mirror by my friend Alan? So far, there's no joy in Mudville. But he did give me an essay that I'd like to read to you tonight that talks about this event, and it talks about some of the factors that may be involved in running and limiting our lives. He simply titled the essay, Smoke. I'm going to read this essay in its entirety. Also, I guess I should give you the standard postmodernist warning that I'm using Al's words. This essay was written 30 years ago, and he probably uses some terms that are not acceptable to many people these days. Well, I've always made my position on that clear. I don't try to offend anyone, but I'm certainly not going to rewrite history or rewrite the words of brilliant men. I think there are two other things I should say here. First, Al has an extremely unusual writing style. He is kind of like Faulkner in that he likes to use really long sentences. He likes to have dependent clause upon dependent clause. But there's genuine brilliance in what he writes. So please put up with his oddity, his idiosyncratic writing. And this is a podcast. You can listen as many times as you want. If you are really confused, just write to me and I'll send you the actual text of this. In fact, maybe I should figure out some way to post it where people can get it. Second, he discusses an important allegorical work by C.S. Lewis called The Screwtape Letters. If you care about paranormal and unusual things, and the morality that might be behind them or surround them, you should take the time to read The Screwtape Letters. It's a book by C.S. Lewis. The book is composed of nothing but letters between Uncle Screwtape and his nephew, whom they refer to as Wormwood. The letters have to do with Wormwood working in the world to advance demonic goals, to be the champion of the devil, to foster evil in the world. He's kind of bumbling at it. And Uncle Screwtape gently cajoles and guides him in his quest to bring pain and chaos to the world. It's extremely funny, and definitely worth a few hours to read. Screwtape and the Pufferbelly Demon by Alan Crystal, August 9th, 1993. Life had been good to Alan. In his childhood, his mother and grandmother had thought it their most sacred duty to provide abundant love and material nurture for their undisciplined wild Indian ward. Liberal, benign neglect permitted great freedom to roam and explore nature's rude and delicious secrets in small-town rural Arkansas. But Alan's life wasn't altogether a boy's earthly paradise. His father's absence was painfully felt, and compulsory Lutheran church and primary school attendance imposed considerable seat-squirming diversion from more immediate interests. Also, a lingering childhood illness struck Alan down when he was 10 and temporarily interrupted his first-hand inquiries into the world of nature. During his year of sickbed confinement, Alan really learned to read. He read all of the World Book Encyclopedia and the Book of Knowledge collections, but he longed to return to the enticements of the natural world as soon as he got well, and he imagined how what he was reading might enhance his explorations. But after his health returned, things were different. Wild Indians don't read at all, and for the most part, their teachers and schoolmates don't read more than their duties require. The fact was, nobody Alan knew had read the encyclopedia, nor had they the slightest interest in ever doing so. When daily trips into nature resumed, only more reading could answer the questions these further experiences raised. After a year or so, the more reading had led to even more reading, and the high percentage of time previously devoted to field research shifted more toward reading and a life of the mind. The wild Indian had carelessly contracted his terminal illness. By the end of high school, Alan was sure that his path to understanding the whole world was the rational knowledge in books. Compared to his peers, there seemed to be another thing different about Alan. While he surely poured more than his fair share into the great global pond of adolescent wickedness, and there was not the slightest doubt of his permanent status as a wretched sinner of the first water, neither he nor anyone who knew him well at all could recall him ever betraying a friend or even telling the slightest lie. In boot camp, cigarettes were almost free. Everyone smoked. Drill instructors marched and exercised their bouncing new herds of recruits all over the training base, going for shots, chow call, uniforms, calisthenics, firing range, and various military indoctrinations. The herd leaders would yell, "Hup, toop, threep, thop," halted every half hour or so for the rest smoke breaks, and pronounced, "Smoke 'em if you got 'em." 90 shiny new Zippo lighters would flash and flame, and within seconds, the herds sucking in and blowing out would envelop the area with a strong nicotine cloud. What could have been dumber in basic training, where Alan frequently lived in these choking billows of smoke anyway, than the turning of himself into a lightning rod for additional torments by signaling he was the only candy-ass donkey refusing to light up with the rest of the herd? Despite his weak and damaged lungs, Alan took up smoking. Sure, boot camp barracks life was coarse and vulgar, but soon, after the job skill testing phase, the quickwits were permanently segregated from the dimwits and transferred out to technical schools. For them, nasty barracks life was over. The Air Force needed people who had read encyclopedias, who could understand how to responsibly handle hydrogen bombs and operate and maintain computers, jet bombers, radars, turbojet test stands, rocket engines, and missile guidance systems. People like Alan, who could recite much of the encyclopedia, filled the bill. The U.S. government spent billions sending such people to special schools to quickly master the Cold War's secret sciences of mutually assured destruction. Graduates of these schools could recite classified knowledge that was not yet in anyone's encyclopedia. But if they did, CIA or the MIB agents would have to silence anyone who heard. Along with a generous ration of arcane technical knowledge, particularly rich in the science of cryogenic propellant rocket engines, military service supplied Alan with the discipline his childhood had often lacked. Membership in the exclusive fraternity of quick-witted men whose disciplined intellects and common doctrine of death before dishonor qualified them to hold their nation's share of the atomic fire of the gods in their least incompetent mortal hands was a rare, awesome, and satisfying privilege. Alan was proud and happy to belong, yet he wrongly thought that given the training the Air Force provided, just about anyone from humanity in general could do his job just as well. But members of his fraternity had to exercise their profound responsibilities and secret technologies in insulated circumstances. Their significant human associations were developed almost entirely with others who were just as uncommon in humanity's general population as themselves. Seldom did they have reasons to notice, measure, or interact with the dishonorable and dim-witted bulk modulus of humanity. The men who held the fire of the gods came almost entirely from rural and small-town white America. Like people everywhere, they thought that all the world was much like their own highly selected and limited experience of it. In short, their real knowledge of mankind's condition was pathetically naive. As a result, the entire nuclear arsenal of the free world was in the provincial hands of overgrown Boy Scouts. Yet, it would be very wrong to suppose such men spent thousands of hours seated an arm's length from their little red launch buttons, which obviously could have offered up tens of millions of unknown persons in foreign lands to rather immediate nuclear torment and death, without thinking about what they were doing there, or wrestling with their consciences as to what it might mean if the terrible order ever came to press their buttons. These bright young men spent years with the troubling question in their faces, preying on their minds. Persistent images of World War II's indiscriminate aerial bombardment of London, Dresden, Tokyo, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki haunted them. The just following orders defense offered at the Nuremberg war crimes trials evoked only the most intense of moral nausea, and the old military slogan, "It's not for us to wonder why, it's up to us to do or die," seemed a terribly poor reason for one or several men to act upon orders to personally massacre millions and millions of innocents. The war in Vietnam was beginning to heat up, and during the Cuban Missile Crisis nuclear face-off, Alan thought about what the hell he was doing sitting in front of his little red ICBM launch button. He concluded that under no conceivable circumstances would it ever make any sense to fire his missiles. It followed logically. Once that mutinous decision was made, Alan had the further moral responsibility to deactivate all the launch buttons he could reach. Now, Alan was the launch team member who had the most intimate technical understanding of and complete private access to all the systems comprising several ICBM sites. He thought of several ingenious ways that relays and wiring could be permanently altered so that future ground testing of launch sequence systems would show that everything was working fine. Yet the missile's nuclear warheads could never detonate. Having covertly discharged his duty to his nation and to innocent humanity, Alan decided to quit the Air Force and join the real world. Still, after his 7 years in the Air Force, neither Alan nor anyone who knew him well could recall him ever betraying a friend or even telling the slightest lie. Alan transferred his military rocket science skills to NASA's Apollo Saturn V moon mission program. The science was much the same, but with more emphasis on pure research and development. Although the work was still highly classified, the endless discomfort of conscience arising from the handling of H-bombs was finally ended, and both the salary and job satisfactions were vastly improved to boot. Most of Alan's fellow space race workers had similar backgrounds. They had experienced military service and technical training, and were steeped in the high security clearance, death before dishonor fraternity traditions, but not quite all. NASA engaged private corporations, aerospace contractors, to design, produce, test, and operate all of the nation's space program ground support, operation, and flight hardware. Less than 1 person out of 500 space program employees actually received their pay directly from the government. The government paid the contractors, and the contractors paid everyone else. And there grew the worm in the apple. The upper management was generally contemptuous of the military's death before dishonor morality, so characteristic of their own middle management on down. Higher management's purposes were definitely not to serve their nation's best interest, but to 1. Advance and secure their personal corporate management careers and improve their incomes. 2. Increase their company's common stock prices. 3. Produce the greatest corporate profit for their stockholders. 4. Obtain and retain as many lucrative government contracts as possible. 5. Sell the government as much as possible of the systems, components, or services that would generate the greatest profit for their corporation. 6. Promote the benefits and advantages of cost-plus contracts, and then, after gaining the contracts, contrive to pack the payroll and inflate the costs as much as possible. 7. Stretch out every contract as long as possible. 8. Cover up and conceal any and every error, defect, mistake, misuse, or efficiency in design, hardware, or operation. And 9. When and if any one of the many potential embarrassments should come to light, place the blame squarely on anywhere except where it rightly belonged. As Alan's space science career progressed, his responsibilities grew. Increasingly, upper management pressured Alan to hold a different kind of fire in his hands than that for which the sacred priesthood of mutually assured destruction had been trained. This was the ancient fire of secret dishonor, a calculated practice of at least falsifying evidence to cover up defects, if not overt cheating and stealing from the company's 2 principal clients, both the thinly spread NASA oversight officials and the American taxpayers, whose distant interests NASA ostensibly upheld. The problem had nothing to do with burns to Alan's hands. Certainly his hands were not made of asbestos. Yet if the cause was just, he was prepared to withstand more discomfort than most. The truth of the matter is that provincial Boy Scouts would rather serve in heaven than reign in hell. And you just can't pay Boy Scouts enough to knowingly play the corruption game. Such obsessively moral and prideful souls lack desires of sufficient compulsion that in order to gain them, they will agreeably trade their honor and conspire with the damned. But, as cunning as old Uncle Screwtape's letters from perdition so appropriately instructed his nephew Wormwood, exciting entertainments staged slightly below the brink of hell's yawning chasm might so irresistibly attract a Boy Scout's innocent interests that he is likely to lean over the edge and then topple in, head first, receiving no compensation at all. After Alan discovered that his employer was responsible for a serious design defect, which threatened a catastrophic explosion of the 1,000,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen stored at the lunar launch pad, his superiors instructed him to cover it up and offered him a promotion. After Alan went to NASA's safety engineers and blew his Patriot's whistle, Alan's company lost money, grudgingly corrected the problem, and of course, promptly found a plausible excuse to fire Alan. No good deed goes unpunished. Several months of unemployment gave Alan plenty of leisure time to lament the injustice of a world that punished the good and rewarded the wicked. He thought of other kinds of work, but try as he might, Alan just couldn't think of anything he liked to do as much as working with rockets. Of all man-made events, only nuclear bomb blasts and large rocket launches create the awesome visceral earthquake that staggers the body, captivates the eye, completely cowers the stoutest soul, and at the same time suggests that mankind might be a lot closer to the Olympian gods than most men imagine. Of these two great spectacles, because of the incredible intensity and extended duration of its thunderous, crackling, chest-pounding roar, a Saturn V rocket launch leaves the most indelible impression upon the plastic psychology of its mesmerized witnesses. NASA's appreciative management thought that Alan might someday again prove useful to their purposes. So, when the scuttlebutt waves from Alan's notorious whistleblowing died down, NASA officials pressured one of the Apollo program aerospace companies to discreetly hire Alan, despite his problematic loyalties to contractors. Alan's new employer explained that he should keep in mind that he would not be working for NASA, but for a private company, and that if he should be terminated from his new job for any reason at all, no one would ever be likely to hire him again, and his fragile career in the space program would be permanently ended. Alan's cautious new supervisor was pretty sure that Alan would probably make his best contribution in the technical areas, where the company had the least to cover up, or, if the truth should come out, to lose. The technical challenge of exploring inner space in the extreme pressures of the ocean depths was almost as interesting to Alan as the rocket race to outer space. In his spare time, Alan was working on an innovative design for a deep-diving research submarine. Submarines and spacecraft both share similar life support system requirements. It occurred to Alan that the government had already spent millions of taxpayer dollars investigating and solving the life support system problems for the Apollo capsule. And although Alan's technical responsibilities in his new Apollo program job had nothing at all to do with the manned capsule's life support systems, he had no legitimate need to know about the details of such systems. Specific information about how Apollo's life support systems eliminated CO2 buildup in the cabin atmosphere might prove useful to his personal submarine design project. After all, what could it hurt? Who would ever know or really care? If Alan violated security protocol just a little bit and sneaked a quick peek at the classified system plans stored in NASA's vast VAB tech library. Somewhere in the dimension of perdition, Screwtape grinned in a particularly leering, gleeful, and unpleasant fashion. Was that a goody-goody scout approaching the brink of his domain? What a fine trophy he would be. When Alan's sneaky peeking around uncovered the disturbing fact that the Apollo command module used a pure oxygen atmosphere in ground launch operations, he was shocked and astonished. The subtle laws of basic chemistry suggested that almost any material at all will burn in pure oxygen. Alan's supervisor said he would check it out, and a week later told Alan that all of the materials inside the capsule were special and had been tested and found to be totally incombustible. Alan jumped the chain of command and talked with the materials lab supervisor, who said that while less combustible materials had indeed been chosen for the capsule, basically everything inside, including the flight crew, might possibly burn just fine. When Alan offered his manager this fresh, troubling, and unwelcome insight, the manager responded with several pointed and not entirely rhetorical questions of his own. First, look, Alan, if you didn't have your present job, do you know where you could find another job you might like as well? Second, Are you aware that federal law provides for large fines and extended prison terms for persons who try to obtain unauthorized information by the willful violation of standard security protocols? And 3, how would you like explaining to the FBI how you came to have classified information that you have no need to know about Apollo life support systems? These were all fairly easy questions for Alan, who promptly answered, "Not right offhand. I think I did see a few posted warnings at the tech library counter, and not much at all." "Well then," Alan's boss summed up, "the best thing for you to do is to shut up about this oxygen hazard thing and limit your concerns to the areas of your assigned responsibilities on the Saturn V rocket. Especially now, when I might as well go ahead and tell you that the company has been considering you for a good promotion with a nice pay increase. Banishment from the space race, paying heavy fines, and going to prison all seemed much less appealing to Alan than his promotion prospects. Sure, Alan thought about squawking to NASA again, or of notifying the press, or of contacting congressmen about his concerns. But in this instance, the case was scarcely as easy to make, or as clear-cut, as was the earlier hydrogen tank issue. Actually, the whole matter was mostly a tough judgment call that Alan disagreed with, and nobody wanted to hear Alan's overly negative and alarmist opinion. NASA, the contractors, and the Apollo crew all knew they were using pure oxygen in the capsule, and they had a good reason for the practice. The pure oxygen scheme made the life support system lighter and simpler than safer alternatives. Merely vent cabin pressure into space during the ascent phase of flight until the optimal breathing oxygen partial pressure of 4.7 psia results, then stop venting. If the pure oxygen system drops to the target pressure as it rises through the atmosphere and reaches the vacuum of orbit without incident, it should be perfectly safe, at least until descent repressurization. In weightless conditions, no convection currents exist to transport fresh oxygen into fires, and flames tend to smother themselves in their proximate products of combustion. With good luck, the pure oxygen scheme might actually work. The simple design was a calculated risk, justified by the conceived urgency of the Cold War space race. And high officials, both in and out of government, were well aware of it. But all of the involved officials still wanted a plausible deniability defense in case disaster should strike. Alan dropped the issue, and his interests and actions quickly shifted their focuses back toward his officially assigned duties. Meanwhile, in the infernal regions, the faint gleam of eager fangs shining through Screwtape's diabolic smile provided minor relief from the normal surrounding gloom. Was that a Boy Scout leaning precariously over the brink of the abyss? During ground test operations in January of 1967, only 2 months after Alan had questioned the safety of the capsule life support scheme, a pure oxygen flash fire struck the Apollo-Saturn 1B rocket stack, gutted the capsule interior, and burned alive 3 moon mission astronauts, Chaffee, Grissom, and White, who died without ever hearing of Alan's faint protest. A prolonged accident investigation ensued, but no NASA official or contractor manager would either admit that he had ever heard of a potential safety problem, resign in disgrace, or say that either he, his subordinates, or his company were guilty of the slightest incompetence. None of the investigators wanted to speak with Alan or to hear about either his incriminating conversation with the materials lab supervisor or his concerned attempts to elicit some corrective action from responsible systems managers. Alan was sick to his stomach. He suddenly realized that he had somehow without much understanding of what he was doing at the time, sold out morally. Of the 50 or so people who had a general awareness of the fire hazard, Alan had been in the best situation to try to do the right thing with minimal injury to himself. He had no family to support. He had trivial ambitions to gain wealth or power. He cared little for what most men thought about him. He was merely a man who liked working both with rockets and the kinds of men who worked with rockets. He could have publicly violated security and denounced the oxygen fire hazard in the mass media. If the issue had been made public, probably none of the responsible officials would have dared to risk their necks by insisting that everything was safe. The moon mission might have been set back by 3 weeks, or perhaps a month, while a simple fix, like the one Alan had secretly designed 2 months before the accident, was implemented, instead of the 2 years of confusion and blame dodging that actually occurred. If Alan had just done the right thing, 3 brave and decent men would still be alive. Their parents, wives, and children would still have their sons, husbands, and fathers. And the small costs of these enormous benefits would have only been the likely loss of Alan's favorite pastime by his permanent exclusion from the space program, and the remote risk that Alan would visit prison for his breach of security. The facts were clear. Just to make sure that he could keep his enjoyable job and avoid risk of prosecution, Alan had decided to renounce his moral responsibility to the general welfare and do nothing to fight against the fatal hazard. Even though, technically, Alan was still in his decent status that neither he nor anyone who knew him well could recall him ever betraying a friend or even telling the slightest lie, he could no longer take any pride in that familiar fact. In his heart, he knew his cowardly, self-serving inaction had not only betrayed, but also likely resulted in the death of innocent strangers. That the 50 other men above Alan in the space program's management hierarchy had also sold their virtue for pleasant rewards gave not the slightest exoneration to Alan's failing. For the first time in his life, Alan began to dimly appreciate both the universal frailty of human morality and the incredibly seductive powers available to the secret forces of darkness. Suddenly, to his horror, Alan noticed that he himself was tottering at the brink of abysm, and the demonic host writhing below were eager to celebrate his timely initiation into perpetual perdition. In his state of moral confusion, Alan just didn't know what he should do next. But Alan's better angels of good conscience were telling him one thing with absolute certainty. If he agreeably accepted rewards resulting from his immoral acts, his innocence would be lost forever. When Alan gave notice to his nervous bosses that he was quitting his rocket job to work on his sullied soul, they thought Alan had lost his worry-warding and now dangerous mind. With sighs of relief, Alan's bosses blessed his quixotic quest and smiled with warm satisfaction as he departed. Screwtape, however, wasn't smiling. He was berserk with terror and rage. The worst possible disaster had crashed down upon his division of damnable responsibility, and there would surely be hell to pay. Alan no longer seemed a scout ready to topple over the brink into hell, but a scout who had taken a real good look at the more conspicuous aspects of perdition, who, armed with that terrible perspective, was now racing away from the brink at full speed, and whose soul was probably, at that very moment, being transformed by the secret agents of virtue into that most unpredictably dangerous of all possible antagonists to evil, an embryonic, judgmental prophet of the infinite creator. So not only had the scout he had counted on to fill his quarterly quota of souls escaped the expected fall into perdition, but he would also probably try to warn and steer many other vulnerable targets away from the diabolic seduction of perdition. When the master of hell discovered Screwtape's foul-up, he would almost certainly greatly increase his torments and might even fire and replace him with some younger, more energetic, and less incompetent supervisor of demonic seductions. If the master did that, Screwtape could expect several millenniums of reassignment to unendurable torments in the lowest depths. Dread and doubt flooded over Screwtape's normal, prideful demonic confidence. Why didn't I notice the approaching danger and take some special precautions to ensure delivery of Alan's soul into my district of perdition? I might have transferred a few of my better agents of distraction and diversions from less critical targets over to Alan's damnable case. The Demonic Resources section never sends me enough helpers to get the job done right. Hell knows, judging from his past performance, Alan is surely a compulsive meddler. He won't be content with his own virtue. He will tamper with the calibration of other moral compasses. Who knows how much damage a loose cannon like Alan might inflict on future hellish operations. I will have to organize a special project unit just to monitor and contain damnable Alan's unpredictable impulses to awaken moral awareness in hundreds of potential soul targets. Such a considerable diversion and waste of my limited demonic resources will leave all my other damnable projects short-handed, making it almost impossible to meet my division's damned souls quota. Still, that seems my only possible chance of hiding my catastrophic failure from his damnable satanic majesty and escaping consignment to the unendurable torment division. Damn. 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 After leaving the space program, Alan knew that unless he was prepared to sell his virtue, he would never get very far working for someone else. He was sure he would rather starve than fall into that trap again. So after floundering about for a few years through various low-responsibility dead-end jobs, Alan started his own business. He designed, manufactured, and sold electronics, loudspeakers, and computers, and after a few more years, he became financially comfortable. He reached 42, in excellent health, with lots of energy. Most people thought he was 30. Several lovely women showed Alan affection, but after a few frustrating years of pretending to love him more than they loved all else, they thought Alan hadn't reciprocated. He had loved truth and honor more than he had loved them. They all decided he was just a hopeless case, gave up, wrote off their bad investment, and moved on. So Alan had sired no children. But Alan's conscience was clear, and he was immensely happy. He always slept like an innocent baby with pleasant dreams. The women who had abandoned Alan had known him well enough. He really did love truth above all else. He had mastered many books on many subjects, and he could converse fluently about physics, history, philosophy, religion, government, psychology, art, chemistry, economics, management, salesmanship, aerodynamics, space travel, computers, machine design, classical music, architecture, warfare, you name it. To his agile mind and vast storehouse of knowledge, most problems were simple challenges Alan could nearly always quickly solve. During his rocket engine research and development days, a test-firing accident had subjected Alan to a near-death experience. After that, he never gave a thought to his afterlife. Such concerns were entirely in God's domain. But Alan did have his own faithless religion. He never violated its canons. Truth, honor, reason, empirical science, technology, and comprehensive history composed its granite foundation stones. Most people quickly tired of Alan's company. He would pepper them with questions they couldn't answer about subjects they didn't care about. If they tried to answer, Alan would contend with anything they said and insist upon rational evidence, often by providing lengthy and unwelcome answers to the very questions he himself had just asked. Alan would add prolonged insult to his rude injury to their egos. True. When sometimes a person answered a question with knowledge Alan didn't yet own, he would shut up and listen attentively. But that seldom happened. Alan rarely gave personal affirmation, and he seemed indifferent to receiving it. Plus, he smoked constantly. Only special brave souls with secure self-images and smoke-tolerant lungs who really wanted to either learn or teach knowledge for its own sake would spend much time in Alan's talking smoke cloud. All of which was just fine with Alan, who enjoyed smoking nearly as much as he disliked listening to the trivial social drivel of dimwits. As the years passed in perdition, Screwtape gradually concluded that he had greatly overestimated the potential dangers generated by Alan's earlier narrow escape. Obviously, the distractions and diversions of Alan's active life of the mind and his business success were providing all the contentment he wanted. Alan was surely not metamorphosing, as Screwtape had at first dreaded, into a dangerous prophet who might cause problems large enough to attract the attention of Perdition's highest management, which commotion would then almost certainly eventuate in the disastrous discovery of his previous cover-up of allowing Alan to escape and become a dangerous adversary. Screwtape relaxed. His spirits brightened. While he was surely not reckless enough to make a direct assault upon Alan's soul, he did feel comfortable in leaving well enough alone, so he reassigned the special team that had been charged with neutralizing possible prophetic opposition from Alan to various understaffed enterprises of greater promise and priority. Alan had finally moved completely off of Perdition's soul-tracking scopes. Then, unbeknownst to Screwtape, like a blinding thunderbolt flashing down from a cloudless sky, something completely unexpected shattered Alan's comfortable worldview that had been comprised of benign distractions and diversions. His first anonymous letter arrived. It read something very much like this. Dear Alan, happy 42nd birthday. I'm sending you this strange letter because you seem honest enough to accept a big truth about yourself in your middle age, even if it makes you unhappy and requires you to start all over, remaking your ideas about the world. I'm going to trouble you with such a truth. There is no doubt in your mind that smoking is permanently poisoning your body. You surely know that as you grow older, your previous smoking will cause incurable health problems, suffering, disablement, and premature death. In the past, you probably quit smoking just to prove that you have the willpower to do so. But then you started smoking again. Alan, you consider yourself intelligent, logical, and moral. You try to do good and avoid bad. You know it's bad for you to smoke, yet you smoke anyway. Honor requires a good mind like yours to deal with the following question. If your logical mind thinks you shouldn't smoke, what can explain the fact that you are still smoking? You think you like to smoke. That's true, you do. Smoking causes pleasant sensations, which you do enjoy. But I can assure you, and will provide you with a direction of inquiry that will demonstrate that's not the main reason why you smoke. Your naive investigations into psychology and psychiatry have informed you of multiple personality disorder, MPD. You have studied literature citing that such cases are rare, but that is true only in a certain limited sense. The key word in the subject diagnosis is disorder. If multiple personalities living in the same brain neither cause some major functional problem in a patient's normal social life, nor identify themselves as separate persons whom others notice, they in principle go undetected. Hence, the actual case is that when language-using spirits who share joint tenancy in one brain decline to identify themselves as discrete persons, each with his private purposes and methods of achieving them, then public persons don't know of their existence. The exceedingly rare diagnosed cases of MPD merely hint at the tiniest tip of a monstrous, submerged, spiritual iceberg. All human brains can and do support more than one language-using person. In the case of most normal person, one single spirit achieves and maintains general dominion over its spiritual brainmates. That is the only person who is normally noticed socially by others. But the subordinate spirits are still real and still present. They know direct contention with the powerful spirit who holds principal dominion in the brain they share, offers no prospect of realizing their private purposes. Discreet insinuation promises their most feasible strategy for realizing their individual purposes. I'm sure by now you are beginning to get the picture. At this very moment, you are sharing your brain with a loathsome spiritual tenant, a Pufferbelly demon, who is gradually killing your body and defiling your soul. Keep in mind that your Pufferbelly is also reading this letter, and he will react to it. This demon will work insidiously to persuade you of the following. 1. Demons don't really exist. 2. It is really you who wants to smoke. 3. Smoking isn't actually very harmful. And 4. To have a pleasant smoke right now, and think about how implausible this crackpot theory of demonic influence really is. Now that I have granted you this little glimmer of light, you have the knowledge of good and evil. Surely, ignorance can no longer serve as your excuse. You understand the moral choice that you must make. Knowing your strength of character, I'm sure you will do the right thing. Best wishes for a better life. Signed, A Secret Friend. Alan was utterly stunned. He couldn't think of anyone he knew who could have either figured out such an odd proposition or sent him the letter. Sure enough, just like the letter had warned, a very disturbed Alan heard himself say to himself that he should light up and think about this new problem. On his way to the bookstore to buy books on demonic possession, the voice in Alan's head incessantly repeated the 4 arguments in the letter, plus a few more the letter hadn't mentioned. But Alan stubbornly refused to light up. He purchased M. Scott Peck's People of the Lie and Malachi Martin's Hostage to the Devil, plus a number of lesser-known titles, and began his new study project. Now, 18 smokeless years have passed without Al's Pufferbelly demon in some remote, infernal dimension having said another word. Alan still obstinately refuses to admit any normal religious faith. And he will likely go to his grave a physical scientist and engineer at heart. But he now prophetically proclaims that his extended scientific research into the complex questions and incredible implications of actual non-mystical demonic possession have produced a whole new universe of knowledge about human possibilities. And there the essay ends. It's like an unfinished symphony by Schubert. My mother used to sing to me, "This is the symphony that Mr. Schubert never finished." Anyway, I find the ideas that Al puts forth to be incredibly challenging. And over the years, I have found them to be true. I do know, for myself, that there are multiple personalities in my brain. I don't believe that they're problematic, but just think about it. How much time do you spend walking around thinking to yourself and then kind of answering yourself? Well, that means obviously that there are 2 personages in there that can talk to each other. I know that there are times when I find myself doing things that I know intellectually and emotionally are not things that are beneficial to me. I put up with that. If I ever find myself doing something that is not beneficial for someone that I love, then I draw the line. I think there's a lot in this. I think that human psychology generally overlooks this. The fact that our lives are constant struggle within. a constant struggle to make sure that the, as Abraham Lincoln would say, better angels of our nature dominate. Man, that's a beautiful phrase. Better angels of our nature. Allen uses the term moral nausea in his essay. I can't stop myself from thinking what it was like for him to get the news, probably almost in real time. In fact, he may have been there at the Cape, I don't know, of the fact that Grissom, Chaffee, and White had died. That they had died indeed in a flash fire from a 100% oxygen atmosphere capsule. And to have the awareness that he could have stopped it. It would have been painful. I guess we're faced with many things that we can do that would be painful, that would require personal sacrifice. When I was still working in nursing, I was present at a code. A code is when someone is dying, where you pull out every heroic measure you have to try to keep them alive. Intubation, defibrillation, every drug you can imagine, CPR. It's chaos. And it's challenging even for the very best nurses and very best doctors. During one of those codes, I saw the best nurse I've ever known inject 200 milligrams of dopamine directly into a patient's vein. Normally, 200 milligrams of dopamine is diluted in 500 cc's of D5W, and it's given based on micrograms per kilogram per minute. Tiny, tiny, tiny dosages. And finally, at the end of the code, the patient survived. I have no idea how. It seems to me like that amount of dopamine would have just been instantly fatal to anyone. But perhaps the fact that he was so sick made it possible for him to survive that. Maybe it saved his life. I never said a word to anybody. I never felt the incredible sadness that I'm certain that Alan must have felt. That feeling of personal responsibility. I couldn't have done anything about it after it happened. I did not want to damage the career of a very, very fine nurse. And the patient was okay. But it's not a morally clean, morally comfortable decision to make. I was aware of physicians who were utterly incompetent, who made many, many mistakes, who simply didn't know what they were doing, who were clearly putting patients in danger. I never said anything. What was I to say? To go to a hospital administrator and say, Dr. X routinely prescribes ridiculous medications that simply cannot work with what he's trying to treat. He makes mistake after mistake after mistake. I'm terrified to take care of his patients because I feel that any time he might make an order that would make me liable for someone's death. I believe in demons. I believe in real biblical demons. I believe I've seen their activity and presence and influence in hospitals multiple times. I'm dealing with something in that realm that isn't human, never was human, couldn't ever possibly be human, and absolutely hates humans. I also believe in the demons that Alan postulates. And I think we probably have to contend and fight against them, or maybe with Alan's demons, fight with them, every single day of our lives. Well, I think I'm going to call this program done, even though it feels as if I haven't made a perfect ending to it. And I'm not even going to let Boudreaux show back up and say disparaging things about me. It's been a strange podcast. Please contact me at trailertrashterrors@gmail.com to let me know your thoughts. Do you believe that there are demons within you? Non-mystical demons? Do you believe there are real demons in the world? Is it even something you find meaningful to talk about? Or do you find it frightening? I know many people do. All right, my friends. Please have a blessed, safe, happy, thoughtful week. Until next week, when Trailer Trash Terrors returns.
I must admit some degree of disappointment that I do not get to make snarky, mildly demeaning remarks about Vic Hermansen, but my time will come. Trailer Trash Terrors is written and produced by Vic Hermansen. All media clips in the show are used under the protection of the Fair Use Doctrine. The music you heard was provided by Lobo Loco and Smart Sound. Please, take a few moments to rate and review the podcast, and contact us with any thoughts you might have at trailertrashterrors@gmail.com. Until next time, this is Boudreaux, the cybernetic ghost from the future, signing off.
Thank you.